Before we get to all of today's sunny beach fun, I want to thank Magic Spoon for sponsoring today's video. I've been looking to change up my snacking habits lately, so whenever I've been having Saturday morning cravings, I've been satiating it with bowls of Magic Spoon, and specifically my favorite flavor, blueberry muffin. Magic Spoon's been a great choice for me due to the fact that they have 0 grams of sugar, 13 to 14 grams of protein, and 4 to 5 net grams of carbs in each serving. You can either build your own custom variety box with all the different flavors, or give the new cereal bars, cinnamon roll, and s'mores a good old chomp. It's really up to you. To do so, check out the link in the description below or scan the QR code on the screen, then use the code McMuscles to get $5 off your order today. Thanks again to Magic Spoon for sponsoring the channel, and without further ado, let's start the show. Hello and welcome back to another high-kicking, low-scoring episode of What Happened, the show that investigates the problematic pitfalls of video games, movies, and, in extremely specific cases, both mashed together in a frank but light-hearted manner. This week, we're entering the bright, sunny beaches and inexpensive drab sets of Dead or Alive the Movie, one of the prestigious members of the fighting game film So Bad They're Almost Kind of Good Club of Infamy. Now, as many of us are aware, Tecmo's Dead or Alive series of martial arts and not-so-martial arts video games aren't exactly the most story-rich universe to mine material from, but you know, there's enough there for some amount of drama to unfold, right? I mean, there's a bunch of people fighting and how could a movie about that go so wrong? Well, let's find out as I answer the question, what happened to DOA Dead or Alive?
Dead or Alive?
It's 2002, and hot off the heels of the recent Xbox launch and high-profile exclusivity for Dead or Alive 3, one Mark A. Altman of Mindfire Entertainment was optioning rights to video game series left, right, and center, refusing to stop for any reason, as brands like Pitfall, Shinobi, Crazy Taxi, Dead or Alive, and Fear Effect were among his would-be victims. Now, if you're a hardcore fan of video game movies, you might already be familiar with the name Mark Altman, as he is credited as the writer and producer of 2003's House of the Dead film.
Muerte. That's Spanish for death, in case you don't speak Mexican.
And that concludes this exhaustively answered episode of What Happened. If you know of any other games or movies with tragically troubled tales, do let me know in the comments below. See you next time, and thanks for— okay, there's a bit more to it than that. Altman had founded Mindfire Entertainment and had just shifted their business model into grabbing commercially viable licenses and adapting them with indie-sized budgets, as they were struggling to succeed with all original indie films around that time. Lower budgets also meant minimal risk, which would then be more attractive to the likes of Sega, Tecmo, and many others. In the book, Lights, Camera, Game Over, How Video Game Movies Get Made, where much of the following information comes from, Altman explained his strategy and how they were able to grab so many licenses despite being such a small player in the film industry. The argument we made essentially boiled down to, do you want to get paid a lot of money by a studio who will never make your film, or a lot less from us, but actually get your property made as a feature? This was an interesting tactic because all throughout the 2000s, we constantly heard about various games, comic books, and anime getting optioned to movie companies without ever actually seeing a film materialize in the end. But to be rather frank, Mindfire wound up making a tiny percentage of all the things they got the license to. So, in March of 2002, Mindfire issued a bit of a nothing press release announcing their intent to bring Dead or Alive bouncing onto the big screen with a token vote of confidence from Tecmo themselves. Notably, they also mentioned the film's expected release window, which was sometime in 2003. Most of you DOA fans out there will know that they were slightly off with this estimate, as the film wouldn't arrive until 2006 or 2007 if you were a North American, which truly demonstrates the need for a What Happened episode. Mindfire then teamed up with Impact Pictures, best known for the 17 live-action Resident Evil movies, which was founded by Jeremy Bolt and Paul W.S. I directed the Monster Hunter movie Anderson. Yes, I know he directed the first Mortal Kombat and Event Horizon. I just want to remind people that the Monster Hunter film was indeed a real thing that happened.
So what? Are we like Guardians of the Galaxy now?
Anyway, there was a brief possibility of Anderson himself taking the director's seat, but his plate was already full with Death Race, Resident Evil Apocalypse, and of course not making the unmade Driver film. A writer by the name of J.F. Lawton had been chosen to pen a script for Death Race, which Bolt and Anderson passed on, but still recommended him to Altman as a good choice to tackle Dead or Alive. What were Lawton's past credits, you ask? Well, that would be Under Siege, Chain Reaction, Pretty Woman, and being the creator of the hard-hitting dramatic television series VIP, which probably prepared him best for the task ahead. Not only did he have to craft something that would please producers and fans, but also need to impress Tekken enthusiast and future NFT death merchant Tomonobu Itagaki, as part of the deal included him having final say on the script. So, with all those elements in play, it's safe to say that Lawton had an extremely tough task ahead of him. Lawton was not familiar with any of DOA's deep lore or nuanced characters, but felt it best to immerse himself in all the high-octane action, strike reversals, and ample curves the universe had to offer. During this research phase, he apparently took quite a liking to the source material. Yeah, I bet. So much so that he originally wanted to incorporate the exact movesets of each and every fighter who would appear in the film. So, for example, Tina would have exclusively used pro wrestling during all of her fight sequences.
What a mark!
This is a detail that, in retrospect, he felt wouldn't transition to the big screen in the end, and thus was cut out. Not sure exactly what he meant by this, but I assume he felt that the vast majority of viewers wouldn't really notice or care. I don't know. His first script revolved around Kasumi, Tina, Christy, and a brand new character, a 14-year-old French schoolgirl named Violet. A large number of other fighters would appear in this take on the film as well, including Gen Fu, John Lee, another girl character named Mickey, and Leon, who originally had a much bigger role than what he ended up with. The contestants are invited to a fighting tournament on DOA Tech Island, which is made up of different biomes. These included a snowy mountain, a Japanese martial arts palace, and a Roman Colosseum, all of which were caged within electrified fences.
Electrify the steel cage!
The tournament itself was to be hosted by Fame Douglas, Helena's father, who had previously been an unseen villain in the games. His insidious plan involved sampling DNA from all the warriors in attendance to make some sort of super fighter thing named Epsilon. Oh, and there was this is a real thing, a submarine base below sea level with a subservient clone army consisting of Tina, Christy, Kasumi, and Violet. Lawton had made an effort to keep the film's tone comedic, but ultimately that worked against it. Mark Altman recalls that while the producers found the script enjoyable, it was ultimately not what they wanted, and described it as fun, but not particularly complex. Itagaki, as you'd expect, really liked the new 14-year-old schoolgirl protagonist, but for whatever reason did not want Fame Douglas appearing in the movie at all.
They like Itchy, they like Scratchy. One kid seems to love this
14-year-old schoolgirl.
What more do they want?
No, really. In Lights Camera Game Over, Lawton expressed that he never really understood why Itagaki was so against Fame Douglas being the central villain. Lawton continued with further drafts, swapping out Fame for Donovan, keeping the Epsilon monster thing around, and at one point making sure to include the fact that Fame, Donovan, was making literal love slave clones out of certain fighters in the tournament. These slaves would appear uncared for and emaciated, and by the end of the film's climax, they would literally eat Donovan alive in what I'm sure would have been a moving and poetic portrayal of zombie revengeance. So, try to be shocked when I tell you that the producers then finally decided to pass on Lawton's takes altogether, although Mark Altman recalls them being important to honing in on their central characters, so it wasn't all for naught, just mostly. During this process, esteemed martial arts film director Corey Ewan would come aboard, and after Lawton was dropped, the project would then pick up the writing duo of siblings Adam and Seth Gross, whose only notable credits I could find were episodes of Bill Nye the Science Guy. Very quickly, they began slashing and cutting. Gone were the zombie clones, John Lee, Mickey, Violet, and the electrified fences, and in were the fighting-style absorbing sunglasses, which, to be fair, was probably an improvement compared to the zombie slaves. Mark Altman still wasn't a huge fan of the script and had wanted to make some adjustments, but Itagaki was on board and signed off on the script, so cameras were finally ready to start rolling in 2004. Or were they? Altman, and fans of the series, and Itagaki weren't really pleased with many of the choices Corey Ewan had made during the casting process. In the book I Will Never Stop Quoting, Lights, Camera, Game Over, Altman shared a pretty critical opinion. There are some bad casting decisions in this movie, so let me just say I did enjoy some of the performances. I wasn't that involved at this stage in the movie and am glad I don't have to take credit, or lack thereof, for a lot of the casting. When asked about the film in a 2006 IGN interview, Itagaki didn't really offer an opinion on the film one way or another, but noted particular disappointment in Kasumi and Ayane's casting, but he had no power in this regard, unlike the script. The cast included the likes of Devon Aoki, Holly Valance, Jamie Presley, Eric Roberts, Kane Kosugi of Godzilla Final Wars fame, among other things, big sexy daddy cool himself, Diesel, Kevin Nash.
Oh yeah, I got this. What a pittance.
And finally, Robin Shou in what's more or less a cameo as the Pirate Boss. This marked Robin's third of 4 appearances in fighting game adaptations, which absolutely merits something, a hearty congratulations at the very least.
I don't have time for these stupid games!
All of the actors sweated it out in an intensive martial arts training camp before the movie began filming, and while many described those months of prep as fun and exciting, they were less enthusiastic about the actual shoot, which was mainly done in and around rural China, and I mean really rural China. This was done for the exotic locales, but also to keep the budget on the more frugal side, which reportedly came in at $30 million going by the official press release, but IMDb states $21 million, which, I mean, when you actually look at the film, you wouldn't be surprised if it wound up being the more accurate figure. So, much like the costumes and bikinis in the DOA wardrobe, the purse strings were going to be kept very tight. Thus, the cast had to be put up in the local village, far away from the comforts of Hollywood. There were very few ways to easily contact the outside world, which would have probably been used to complain to their agents about the catering, as several members of the cast came down with food poisoning that lasted for almost the entire shoot. Altman himself did not accompany the crew on this journey, but he was keenly aware of these less than ideal conditions when discussing the film in Lights, Camera, Game Over. Shooting in China was very hard, the crews work very hard, but Corey was very demanding on the actors and it was tough. Things have gotten better in the last decade in terms of shooting there, definitely the food. In that sense, DOA was a little ahead of its time. I think we could have really benefited more from the sense of scope and grandeur that China offers, but we didn't necessarily completely take advantage of. As if that was bad enough, concerns about the language barrier between Corey, who did not not speak English, and the cast also reared their head. An on-set interpreter was needed to translate between director and the actors, which slowed things down dramatically and would sometimes lead to miscommunications, which, when working on an action film, can potentially be disastrous. Eventually, Corey would start to dispense with the process altogether, and often simply pantomimed what he wanted in terms of acting and positioning. In addition to Altman not being on set, both Gross brothers were also unable to join the shoot in China. Now, while it's true you don't need direct access to every producer at all times, the writers may have been particularly useful, as it's not unusual for dialogue and elements of the scenes to be tweaked and adjusted on the fly when the cameras actually start rolling. While this is merely speculation on my part, I think it's likely that having the writers on hand would have helped smooth out some of the film's rougher narrative elements.
You believe the CIA will stop me? I don't think so.
So in July of 2005, after a grueling 3-month shoot, filming for DOA was finally complete. But because I guess Mindfire and Impact Pictures were busy with so many other projects, they hadn't actually netted a theatrical distribution deal for the film, or for where most people would see it, on DVD. Thus, DOA Dead or Alive sat on the shelf for a few months. That is, until November, when Dimension Films, the distributors of Halloween: The Curse of Michael Myers,
The blackest eyes, the devil's eyes,
announced they had grabbed the rights to bring DOA to fans worldwide. Kinda. While the press release went out in November, they said to expect the film in the fall of next year. I guess the sci-fi sunglasses special effects were gonna need that whole 12 months to perfect. What's even more confusing about this is that even though the press release seemed to indicate a global release, it didn't actually get one. Dimension, for whatever reason, wanted to release DOA in a few test markets first to gauge the fan response, which included the UK, Australia, and the Philippines, which kicked off in September of 2006. It's here where DOA made the vast majority of its money, generating $6 million from all 3 markets, which, given the almost non-existent marketing, was a pretty decent start.
Show me the money.
North American fans, however, would be left waiting and waiting and waiting well into the next year. Eventually, leaked prints and online bootlegs from other territories started filtering into North America, despite the continued lack of formal announcement for a local theatrical release. Altman even recalls that there was supposed to have been a big Comic-Con panel with the cast that would presumably kick off a larger media campaign, but was abruptly cancelled for reasons that are still unknown even to him. It took until the summer of 2007 for Dimension to finally announce and/or admit, yeah, okay, it's coming out, you happy? Which it actually did, on a whopping 500 screens, which technically downgrades it to a limited release. In its first weekend, it made around $260,000, and by the time it was pulled from theaters just 3 weeks later, had only generated $480,000 in North America, bringing its grand total to roughly $7 million, against a budget of 30 or 21.
21! I won!
It's possible that DOA Dead or Alive wound up profiting through the home video market and eventually streaming, but those numbers, of course, don't really exist. Now, despite everything, the wonky scripts, the grueling shoot, and the disastrous release model, Mark Altman looks back at DOA Dead or Alive more positively than you'd think, saying in Lights Camera Game Over, "I have movies that I've done that I love. I also have movies that I'm utterly embarrassed by. This is neither. I don't love it and I don't hate it. I like it. Had it been more successful in the US, I think we could have really done a great sequel, fixed the casting, maybe had a director who could work better with the actors, and a stronger script, and it really could have been something special." Mark wasn't kidding about this belief in a sequel, as he felt it could have continued as a serialized TV show, and even contacted a writer to do such. Early on in the process, though, he had failed to get any investors jazzed about the prospect, so the whole thing fizzled out rather quickly. Good old Paulie Anderson was less critical about the original film, also saying in Lights Camera Game Over, "I think Dead or Alive is, for a lot of people, a real guilty pleasure, and it certainly is for me. We knew we weren't making War and Peace, that's for sure. And if you take the movie at face value for what it is, which is a rollicking 90-minute piece of fun, the movie just delivers in spades." Paul W.S., I made the Monster Hunter movie Anderson, producer. You know who didn't think it was a rollicking bit of fun though? Well, that would be Tecmo, who were not happy with the final product. There was even a rumor they had reportedly banned the practice of licensing any of their franchises from being adapted into live-action film, but I guess they made an exception for 2014's Fatal Frame movie. So even though some fans point to it as a cheesy popcorn-fueled romp, its failure to turn a profit and the generally really bad reception made sure that any chance of a sequel or reboot is now far more dead than alive. If you out there know of any other bouncing, beautiful bumbles in the video game or movie industries, let me know in the comments below, over on my Twitter, or hey, if you'd like to see me take the DOA cast to Suplex City in Dead or Alive 3, check out my gameplay channel in the description below, where you can also find a link to purchase Lights Camera Game Over, which is filled with other fascinating stories about failed video game movies, which is almost all of them, actually. See you next time, and thanks for watching!